But speaking of that southern part of the country, oh boy, do we have a lot of good football happening down south. That's for sure. Um, we talked about how Oklahoma and Texas, well, they're going to be going into the SEC after this year. Well, let's actually go ahead and talk about the actual SEC moving forward. And the SEC will have multiple top 25 matchups in their conference this upcoming weekend. But let's start with the one that's going to be happening the earliest. At the same time that the Texas and Oklahoma game is happening, we'll have another noon kickoff. This one is going to be on ESPN following the conclusion of ESPN's College Game Day. We got number 23, LSU. Tigers are still ranked in the top 25 in spite of having multiple losses already. They're the only top 25 team in the AP poll that does have 2 losses. And then they take on a Missouri team. This Missouri team is 5-0, but how legitimate is that Missouri 5-0? Let me take a look at this Missouri schedule real quick. I'm going to read it top to bottom in terms of who they played. They've played South Dakota. They played a close one against Mid-Tennessee State. That was a home game. And for context, Mid-Tennessee State just dropped to 1-5. 1-4 or 1-5. Let me do a discount double check. Make sure I'm reading this correctly. So Mid-Tennessee State is 1-5 because they did just lose to Jacksonville State last night. Missouri barely beat that team. They do have a good win against Kansas State, 60-plus yard field goal, a walk-off. Model really likes that win. We still have Kansas State ranked in the top 25 in our power rating model, even though same could not be said for the AP poll. Then they got a 7-point win over Memphis in a neutral site. Then they opened up conference action, did what they were supposed to do. They beat Vanderbilt by 17. So that leads to Missouri. They're in the top 25 for the very first time this season. They're ranked number 21. So it does constitute this being a top 25 matchup, obviously. This is only the 4th time that these two teams have played. And interesting enough, Missouri actually also has the edge here too. So in the first 3 meetings of this series between these two teams, Missouri does have the 2-1 edge. Both of those wins coming early on in Missouri's tenure when they were making the transition from the Big 12 to the SEC in the early to mid 2010s. But what is truly at stake here? This is not necessarily a game that has the solid same college football playoff implications as what we saw for the Red River rivalry, because LSU already has a couple of losses. So unless there's an extreme amount of chaos and LSU is able to run the table, they go to Atlanta and they win the SEC championship. Unless there's a lot of chaos too, LSU is out of the playoff. Missouri, they're still very much in it. They're 5-0. They're still undefeated. Undefeated SEC teams are always going to get a little bit more love, at least from the national media, at least specifically ESPN. Yeah, I'm looking at you for that little bit of bias there. But LSU, even when we want to talk about the SEC, they really, I'm being dead serious too, they really need to run the table. And even then, it might not be enough to go to the SEC championship if you really think about it. That's because their only loss that they have in conference play, LSU is 2-1 in conference play right now. It's that 55-49 game that we saw last weekend against Ole Miss, where both defense ended up going on vacation. We see how it is. So if Ole Miss runs the table, it doesn't matter what LSU does from here on out because Ole Miss is going to have the tiebreaker. And, this LSU team, while I don't think Missouri is as talented as what that 21 ranking is, I mean, this is certainly going to be a motivated team. Missouri has a chance to go 2-0. And either Georgia or Kentucky, who's ahead of them right now by a half game because Missouri has played one less conference game than both of these teams. Missouri does have a chance to really assert themselves into that SEC East championship race, that divisional title action, because they'll play against Georgia. They'll play against Kentucky later on this year too. So a win for Missouri gets them to 6-0. And which, by the way, Missouri, you want to talk about a big stat for Missouri? This is the first time that Missouri has gone 5-0 since 2013. They ended up starting 7-0 that year and won the SEC East. So the last time that they started a year on a 5-game winning streak, Missouri has gone to Atlanta. Something to really think about there. So what's going to be the key matchup? What is going to be the biggest key in this one? It starts with the LSU passing attack going up against that Missouri secondary. I truly believe after what we have seen through the course of this season, Jaden Daniels, I think legitimately, he is the best quarterback in the SEC. I don't know if it's that close either. I truly don't. Because Jaden Daniels, it's not his fault that LSU has lost multiple games. Jaden Daniels has thrown for 1,700 yards, 16 touchdowns, has 2 interceptions to his name as well. He had a big day against Ole Miss as well. Over 400 yards, 4 touchdowns. That's against Ole Miss too. So Jaden Daniels he's a gamer, man. He can play. He will be an NFL quarterback. Mark it down. The dude is absolutely phenomenal. Now, that being said, Missouri's secondary has also got some guys as well. Most notably in that secondary, they got Chris Abrams-Drain and Ennis Rakestraw. They're two of the some of the premier defensive backs in the entire SEC. But it's not about those two defensive backs specifically. It's about their safeties. Their safeties certainly have had some trouble in the pass defense this season. And LSU, well, they like to have some fun with those explosive plays as well. So that secondary for Missouri, that secondary is really going to be tested this upcoming Saturday. Thankfully, they do have home field advantage, but because they're going to need all the help that they can get. But what other players are to watch in this matchup between LSU and Missouri? And for me, it's about the receivers. We're going to see 2 big-time receivers in this matchup, possibly 2 of the best wide receivers in the SEC. Malik Neighbors, for example, he's a wide receiver for LSU. He might be the I don't want to say that. I don't know. He's not the number 1 receiver in the country. That belongs to Marvin Harrison Jr. And if you don't believe that, I need to figure out what you're smoking and get some of that. But Malik Neighbors is certainly probably the best wide receiver prospect for the NFL in the SEC. He's got that elite speed, goes some really sure hands and versatility, and he lines up in multiple spots as well. The LSU coaching staff does a great job of really lining him up in different places. They'll line him up in the slot. They'll line him up out wide as well. He had a big game last week against Ole Miss. He had over 100 yards in that game against Ole Miss in that absolute shootout. And overall in the year, over 600 yards, got 5 touchdowns already. He has been unguardable practically. The only exception being that Florida State game, but other than that, he's been at or very close to 100 yards in each game that he's played in. Only other exception being Grambling State, but he got pulled early from that game because it was an absolute blowout. So I'm wondering how Missouri is going to contain Malik Neighbors, because if you're going to win this game, what you can't have happen is Malik Neighbors go off. You can't have him be exposed to the safety. So I'm curious if either Chris Abrams Drain or Ennis Rakestraw, one of those two guys shadows Malik Neighbors throughout the course of the game. Because I think those two, at least in certain spots, could guard him one-on-one. But even then, I think Malik is going to get, he's going to get his, but can you make him work hard enough to where, like the juice isn't always worth the squeeze? Now, we'll go to the opposite side. We'll go to that Missouri sideline. They got a really good wide receiver too. Luther Burden III. He's the only wide receiver that's actually ahead of Malik Neighbors in terms of total yards this year. Might not be considered as good of an NFL prospect, but like, dude's a certified baller. He's got that dog in him too. He has almost 650 yards already through 5 games. And he's had 100 yards in every game except that South Dakota game. But he's gotten steadily better as the season has gone on. And he was already a pretty good receiver to begin with. That's the crazy part in this too. Yeah, it's like he certainly would have gotten, I would think, that 100-yard mark if he was able to stay in the game longer against South Dakota. But South Dakota, I totally understand too. And in case you guys haven't noticed too, the LSU pass defense, that pass defense is it is a little on the suspect side. You want to talk about how down bad this defense has been, or at least that they've allowed? If I can even, oh my goodness, where can I find? I just saw it just recently too. Okay, here we go. Yards allowed. LSU has allowed over 250 yards passing. And they were also exposed mightily in that game against Ole Miss. You want to know how many yards they gave up specifically in that Ole Miss game? They gave up over 700 yards of offense, 400 yards passing, essentially. We rounded up, but they had over 400 yards passing. They couldn't get a single turnover. They had to go into the transfer portal to get these pass defenders, and that has not worked out. That has really held back the LSU team as a whole, their inability to really stop the pass defense. So, and Missouri's got a solid quarterback. Brady Cook, he is a solid quarterback for Missouri, and he's got a great receiver in Luther Burden III. So we're going to have to get the Brady Cook. The LSU front seven has to apply pressure to Brady Cook, because if he's allowed to cook, it could be a long day for LSU, and it's going to be one of those things where LSU is going to have to put up 40, 45 points in order to win the game. And that's just not sustainable even in today's college football. You can't do that on a consistent basis. You just can't do it. So we'll see. We'll check the model. We'll check the any given Saturday line. Right now, as of this afternoon, LSU is a 4.5-point favorite. Any given Saturday model is a -12. And I do think that this is a little bit closer to what the model thinks and maybe what Vegas thinks more so, because I don't think Missouri has been tested. And they're going to be tested. And for me personally, I don't think, even though they're 5-0, I don't think that Missouri is actually a top 25 team. I don't. I think Maryland, for example, should be ranked ahead of this Missouri squad. I think like a team like that should be ranked ahead of Missouri. So I do think that Missouri is going to get exposed in this game, and I think LSU wins somewhat convincingly in order to get back on track, and they get some positive momentum as we get into the second half of the season. So we're gonna go with the LSU Tigers, and we're gonna go with them covering the spread as well.